Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about strand 3 and strand 4, instruction and assessment. So by the end of chapter 3, you should be familiar with how instruction relates to language and literacy development, oral language development instruction, literacy development and instruction, how the language of instruction and language fidelity or separation of languages impacts instruction and content development, and how grouping practices structure the way that students interact and use language. Now, primary focus is going to be on understanding what content is being taught and the language of instruction involved in the teaching of that content, and how the interactions that you establish promote or maybe make it more challenging to develop content understanding and language development. For chapter 4, you're going to be looking at assessment and accountability structures and how they are related to different types of assessment. So formative assessment and summative assessment, how that looks in dual language classrooms and looking at assessing content knowledge and language development, and what types of infrastructure are required to help teachers support their students in the best way to develop both content and language development. A big component of understanding assessment is looking at how different types of assessment will be able to inform your understanding of the student's content understanding, and also what particular language development structures they are able to produce, and also if the way that they're producing language reflects, in fact, their understanding of the content, and how teachers can relate those two during their instruction. So some specific considerations as you're reading through both chapters involve looking at different ways to view bilingualism and biliteracy and sociocultural competency development through content instruction, how teachers can develop a sense of metalinguistic awareness, and how that metalinguistic awareness helps language transfer across the grade span, how promoting positive interactions between and among students and teachers helps as a tool to promote both language development and content learning. Different ways that teachers can make content more accessible through different multimodal structures and scaffolding, whether it's language strategies or visual, interpersonal, culturally engaged topics, individualized support, even for students with special needs and accommodations. It would also be helpful to keep in mind how linguistic comprehension and academic performance are key to understanding what a teacher's expectations are for the student's development. And if their content knowledge is developing at a faster rate than their language development, that's okay. What teachers should expect in terms of their students' linguistic output, which is usually the focus that teachers have, versus what kind of quality input are they receiving, and are they being assessed on their content understanding and allowed to use different linguistic representations of how they understand that content. And finally, what is the emphasis placed on translanguaging versus specific language fidelity issues? Like, do teachers only allow students to use a specific language during a specific time instead of allowing them to utilize their entire linguistic repertoire? So by the end of the chapter, you will look at these different principles through the rubrics in terms of how all of this ties together, and looking at what we can do to make sure we are utilizing a research-based approach. What types of strategies intentionally are we using to guide instruction? How we are emphasizing student-centered approaches, and how we can utilize all resources available to us for instructional delivery, involving technology or hands-on based kinesthetic approaches. For assessment and accountability principles, we want to make sure that we are aiming for looking at an infrastructure that ties into multiple ways to analyze language and content development in both languages, looking at how we are aligned with state content and language standards, and using those to guide instruction and curriculum development, using both languages of instruction to be able to develop a better idea of the student's overall academic and linguistic progress, looking at how state standards are reported and measured and how those reflect the program goals, and to be able to justify, especially those early grades, and the language development and content assessment strategies that sometimes look like they're lagging behind. And then the fifth one looks at how we communicate with stakeholders, whether it's local or at the state level, about the intentionality of what we're doing with our instruction and assessment to be able to support students.